We are supported by a couple of companies as well, Belden and Anixter. Belden has been supporting us for every year, and Anixter as well, nearly every year, and Anixter has brought in some folks. There's you can see, I think Dom, is that you sitting there? That's right, there you go, thanks. And I believe Grant is here somewhere, or was here somewhere, or maybe outside. Have a chat with them, see what they're doing in these fields as well, and in the physical data center as well as the technology spaces across. They are also supported by Raritan, Legrand, and Sunbird. Sunbird has a decent software. Raritan has a wide swath of products that get used in a variety of departments here at the Crown as well as private sector. I'm just thankful that they put their name next to my tiny little business. And I am very humbled by that, so thank you very much. And in helping our international relations, if you want to take a photo with Jamal Khashoggi, you're wondering why he's here, he's everywhere. I'm just kidding. He is, obviously, if you follow the KSA and the stories, that's a little bit for you, but I have him here as a political satire. We had him on the Hill one day, taking photos with some other folks, and it was kind of an interesting thing. You know, what's Canada doing about it? It's similar, it's political, and we're noticing IT is less and less technological and more political, and more impacting. And Saeed and I work together on a particular work effort at Shared Services Canada in the same building, but not on the same work effort. Saeed and I had been talking about a particular problem. We were talking about impact of attack, like in the law. Is it damage or destruction, death or dismemberment, law of armed conflict talk, cyber being law, and Tessio explained cyber war versus warfare, unique concept there, and I agree with him. In that sense, we were having a conversation, could you cause death maybe through cyber? And this got Saeed thinking really well, and he said, oh my goodness, he came up with something that might still be secondary. It certainly is secondary. It's not primary directly, like he hasn't zapped you through a keyboard and killed you, or electrocuted you through your mouse, or burned your retinas and caused physical damage from your screen somehow by, none of that. But some really unique data that I'm so excited for his research. His research is still in progress. Could you please welcome Saeed up here?
Neil, thank you. That's a very generous those were some very generous words and a very nice introduction. I had a comment I was going to make about lunch, but that was when my talk was scheduled for after lunch. So unfortunately, it looks like I'm before lunch. I don't want you guys to get hangry on me. I don't want to be holding you from food. So, and on top of that, we're a bit tight on time. So I'll try and be a bit quick, and I'll try to avoid the feedback as much as possible. Test out my laser pointer. Awesome. I feel like one of those protesters. So, huh?
Is it advanced?
Oh, it should, yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I tested it before. So just from the top, this is a very important venue to me. I studied computer systems engineering here at Carleton, and I was twice in your current seats right now. One as a student here at this institution, back when they had ugly plastic chairs, not these more interesting looking ones here. And I was also a conference goer last year. So I was sitting in the audience. I asked perhaps a few too many questions, and then Neil said, hey, perhaps maybe you should write some of this up and present it next time. I'm gonna ask everyone, please hold your questions for the end, just to keep things moving. There's gonna be things that are gonna catch your interest that you may wanna comment on, but most likely the following slides will answer some of those questions, and then we can all speak. And also, we can definitely sit down and have a chat during lunch. I'm free and open to do that. The main purpose of this talk is really to start a conversation. I've done quite a bit of a literature search when it comes to IT security. And when it comes to the issue of mortality, a lot of people talk about it in hand-wavy terms. They say, this event happened, could have caused some loss of life, but most of the analysis is almost always focused on downtime, replacement costs, these types of matters. It's much more a dollars and cents things. It never really focuses on human life. So, forget it, guys. PHP. Right. Just technology is everywhere in our lives these days. For the longest time, the internet was just, a novelty, right? But we're all technology professionals here. It's no longer really just a novelty. It's become much more of a necessity. It's slowly evolving into our communal nervous system, and disrupting something as important and as crucial as that, it cannot be as light or as trivial as it once was. For a long time, we could tolerate these disruptions. They would have simply been a nuisance, but now they're becoming something that's really hard to tolerate and that could cause loss of life. Technology is everywhere in our lives these days, right? Work, home, school, space even. And we really can't get away from it, and it's slowly seeping into every aspect of our lives. But the big question is our tech safe? Now, when it comes to a single product, a medical device, or an aircraft, I don't think that's the 737 MAX. It's a smaller plane, but we're really good at securing individual things like this. People take ownership, it's their product. One of the classes I took here was a software testing class, and my prof was from Airbus. And he spoke to us in detail about how important testing is, specifically in the aerospace industry. Now, we're really good at securing single items, but when it comes to large integrated systems, it's a bit more difficult, right? Now, the title of this conference is Data Center Architecture Roadmap. Thank you. Yeah. But the roadmap, DCAR. So, this is something that's familiar to all of us, to a lot of people here. And I was, when it comes to large integrated systems, it's harder to pin down where the risk is coming from. It's easy to pass the blame to say, this component is the failure point, that other component is the failure point. But, I spent some time staring at these walls and these racks and trying to figure out how to analyze and figure out the, a systemic risk like this by doing some sort of system-wide analysis. And I found my inspiration in John Snow. Now, not that John Snow, but this John Snow, right? Actually, John Snow, I was intrigued by that. But John Snow is a Victorian-era physician. He worked in the United Kingdom, in London specifically, and what he did was he studied cholera cases in London. This was, the height of the Industrial Revolution. This was, basically Oliver Twist, and it was basically, a lot of people were suffering from very serious poverty, and a lot of people were dying of diseases that we've easily defeated now. And what he did was he looked at the houses where people died because of cholera, and he tracked those specific houses, and he plotted them on a map, and he compared the locations of these mortalities, and he plotted the locations of local latrines, and he plotted the locations of pumps and wells in the area, and he was able to correlate, and as a result, we invent what is now epidemiology. So I wanted to take an approach similar to him. I wanted to find a way of systematically approaching this question. Not going after a single device that failed, like an MRI machine or an X-ray device that was giving people excessively high doses. So what I did was, I'm trying to remember the next slide. What I did was, taking some inspiration from the United Kingdom, I took and I asked myself this: if we could attach bodies, or if we could attach deaths to a specific cyber event, our best option or our best chance of getting this was the NHS WannaCry attack that happened in 2017, about 2 years ago. The victim organization was very unique. It was an organization that kept excellent mortality numbers, and it suffered an outage for about a week. So the question then became, well, how do we go after this specific attack? Look at what happened in the weeks before the attack, when the attack happened, and then the weeks following the attack, and looking at those mortality numbers. One problem, I'm going to quickly look at the next slide. Now, Dr. Dali. One problem that I ran into is what I'd call almost an uncertainty principle. The closer I focused on, the specifics geographically, if I wanted to look at a specific single hospital, what would immediately happen is the time would blow up. If I wanted mortality numbers for a specific hospital or a trust, I could only get numbers that were on the annual scale. And this was an event that happened over 4 days to a week. So any signal would immediately get squelched and it would disappear. If I wanted to then focus on the temporal axis and say, listen, I want the daily mortality numbers, well, that didn't exist. Weekly mortality, monthly mortality numbers, then I started getting some results. But those numbers, in a geographic perspective, kind of blew up. What I was involved in for a couple of weeks or even a month or more was a little bit of bureaucratic arm wrestling. I'd be sending emails to staff at the NHS, they'd be sending me emails back. This is something that I do at my work. The first slide said affiliated with the government of Canada. That's where Neil and I know ourselves from. But again, I just want to say this is just my own personal opinion and my own private research. It's not associated with my employer, but it's something that I'm well practiced at, arm wrestling and dealing with other bureaucrats. But in the end, what happened was I had to give up. I had to take a strategic retreat and take a different approach. What happened was the NHS said they cannot give me data by hospital that was very granular. My best approach was to go to the ONS, which is the Office of National Statistics in the UK. The ONS maintains stats on mortality across the UK. When you get the average mortality numbers for England, Wales, or the various countries that make up the United Kingdom, these are the people that provide it. They provide stats on the weekly level of granularity. They do fantastic work. They split it up by different age groups, not gender, but sex, different age groups. They also look at the causes of death, the regions. The closest geographic, again, this uncertainty principle that I could focus on was the regions here. These regions, I was able to get data for the regions that make up England and also Wales. And it's only at the large regional level. Those are the two northern regions, the Midlands. And what I was able to also get was I combined this with data from the acronyms get me. I know our local acronyms. The ONA, I believe, the Office of the National Audit Office in the United Kingdom did a detailed audit on the NHS WannaCry attack. And they said that the regions that were most heavily affected were the northern regions, the Midlands, and then the eastern regions. So what I did was I took this weekly mortality numbers and I separated the regions into two populations, the more heavily affected regions and the less heavily affected regions, and then I compared that. The very first bit of data, and now we're actually getting to the data, not just the preamble, is this. It's a little hard to read. The research is still in progress. I don't think I can do a zoom, can I? No. So over here are the more affected regions. These were the regions that were more heavily affected by the attack. The main difference between these regions was one of the controlling machines was basically, a knockout signal was given to WannaCry, and it didn't spread to all regions. So the more affected regions are on this axis, and this is the mortality numbers. Each one of these dots represents 1 week. So on this week, the more affected regions had something in around 8,000 deaths that week, and then the less affected regions had a little over 4,500 deaths. And in blue, basically, are the mortality numbers before the attack, and then in orange are the mortality numbers after the attack. The thing that I was looking for was this. Before the attack, it was in winter. Overall mortality is higher. Mortality numbers come down during the summer and then they go back up in the winter. So these dots, these represent individual weeks, would start here, transition down over the air, and then transition back up as we go back to December. And this is the standard rhythm in the United Kingdom. Before the attack, the correlation between the more affected regions and the less affected regions is very high. The R-squared is 0.98. After the attack happens, in orange, the correlation, the R-squared decreases a bit. It goes to 0.91, maybe 0.92. So what happens is these populations were very tightly correlated. After the attack, they separated a little bit. Not completely, but a little bit. Now, the other important thing was since this is the more affected regions, the behavior we're expecting, or that I was expecting, is that the dots would move in this direction, which means the dots would appear over here at the bottom and to the right, meaning that there are more mortalities for the more affected regions, and the mortality rates for the less affected regions stay the same. And when we look at the orange here, what happens is first of all, the dots become more widely distributed, and at the same time they do bulge to the bottom and to the right. So it looks like there's a bit of a signal that there are a few more deaths, there is a slightly higher mortality, and it's basically the two populations separated, and they separated in the expected direction. The more affected regions had higher mortality rates. So I tried to, and again, this here has very little analysis. It's basically separating the regions and plotting the numbers. So I tried to do a little bit of some second order thinking, and I looked at the change in mortality week on week. Now, in blue is the mortality rates for all regions, all of England and Wales. And then the orange are the mortality rates for the regions that were more heavily affected by WannaCry. In the beginning, the numbers sort of snake around one another. The event happened on the 19th week, so 20th is a fair approximation. And then after that, what happens is the orange starts becoming a bit more volatile. It sneaks a little higher up and lower. They snake around a little bit, but it does sneak up higher and lower. And then after, let's say the 40th week, they kind of start wrapping around and winding around each other. The next bit of analysis was basically subtracting the orange number from the blue number to try and focus in on what these differences meant. And this is what we get. Now, what happens is over here, the zero baseline basically means that the more affected regions are absolutely identical to the overall number. But the more affected regions randomly do kind of oscillate back and forth. And they stay within this well of about 2% more or 2% less. The event takes place over here, and then they start becoming more volatile, but sneaking up into the more high mortality. And then afterwards, they come back into that standard well of between -2 and +2. I kind of highlighted this in this next image. So this is the actual hack. Beforehand, the more affected regions kind of follow. Basically, all regions are that green line right there, right? The more affected regions kind of wind back and forth. The attack happens, and then suddenly it becomes more volatile, more volatile, more volatile, and then afterwards the perturbation seems to kind of exit the system and it goes back into its standard well. So this is basically the main finding that I was able to find. The attack happens, and it's like hitting a drum or dropping a pebble in a pond. There are some ripples, and then the ripples calm down. Now, what's important to say about this data is that, well, before that, what I tried to look at was over here. If you see, this area here is quite a bit higher mortality side than the skew to the lower mortality side. So I said, well, what if we take 1 to 2% increase in mortality for these more highly affected regions? What does that mean? At this scale, it means on the low end 50 potential lives lost. And it can be about as high as 150. At events like this, this is a systemic issue. The loss of life is distributed. It's not localized. It's not an airplane crashing. It's not a bus crashing where you see, the bodies all in one location. It's something that's distributed across an entire system, an entire national health system. Before I get into the caveats, I just want to go a little bit more into the implications. For this NHS WannaCry event, the NHS was not able to fully account for the damages that hit their organization and that affected the country. They were able to track down about 7,000 canceled appointments and operations, and they estimated that that number could be about as high as 19,000. And these types of operations and appointments also had knock-on effects. As one is canceled, someone else has to be shifted down. Someone who could have been seen for a biopsy or a check with their doctor could have been delayed, and that may have added a little bit of a risk to them, but distribute that over millions of people, over a country of over 60 million, it can have an effect. Now, it's very important to get to these caveats. This is preliminary, right? I wasn't able to get the data that I wanted. My initial hypothesis was if we're going to attach bodies to a particular cyber attack, the best one we could find would be this one, the NHS WannaCry, where we had a serious availability crisis for about a week. I wasn't able to get the data from the NHS. Part of the reason why I'm here, part of why I'm presenting is to start this conversation. And hopefully if there's anyone here who's either from the NHS or connected to them who can help me twist some arms, right? You know, in local parlance, this is called stirring the pot a little bit, right? That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get them to release the real data so that we can do the real analysis. This is basically just overall regional mortality numbers. If we take, this is a more than 30,000 foot view, right? But if we take a very high level view, what's happening here is this. Electricity started out as a novelty. It was something fun that we show at world fairs, you know, where we say, hey, look at this fantastic little shining bulb. It doesn't burn any, you know, whale fat or tallow, right? And it eventually became a necessity. It became something that we couldn't separate from our lives. Hospitals have backup generators. It's not acceptable for an OR or an ER to go dark just because the electricity went out. The cyber world is the same thing. Cyber was a novelty, right? And it's not anymore, it's a necessity. When cyber goes down, a lot of necessary functions cannot carry on as before. And it's appropriate that this is a data center focused conference. It's very important to say that for certain systems, we have to insist and demand high availability because people's lives could be lost. I don't really need to go into my notes. I just wanted to say another aspect, bringing it a little bit back to the venue here is you know, this is an engineering school. We're in Minto Case Center for Advanced Studies in Engineering. And another thing that I'd like to see happen is that we take a bit more of that engineering focus on safety over just mere compliance. Instead of just saying, system is compliant, I've got my clipboard, check, check, check. We need to actually look at the safety implications of a lot of these complicated integrated systems. And I'm going to be publishing this. I have a few people that I need to work with. I may have to pivot. I may go with more local data, disruptions here in Ottawa. You know, if I could find better data closer to home. I heard that hospitals in Sudbury may be a bit more receptive, so I may have to take a bit of a road trip and see, you know, what their averages will like and if they're keeping good mortality numbers. But the point here is to start a conversation, a little bit to stir the pot and to really start a conversation. If you want to continue that conversation with me, you can connect with me here. Or again, here. And it's lunch. I don't want to hold people from lunch. That's never a very good practice. I'm starting to feel a little hungry myself. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask them right now. I'll leave it a bit to Neil. You can also kind of grab me at lunch and ask me questions there as well. But do you have any questions? Perfect. Right now, I love it.
Well, just out of curiosity, was the cyber attack that had you thought of looking at the statistics available for Puerto Rico with their extensive hurricane losses? Because certainly the downing of their electrical system could be
That's devastating.
Implemented by a cyber attack.
That's devastating, but the main thing, the reason why I would avoid something like that is the confounding factors, right? People would say there's broad damage to simply the road infrastructure, the sewage system. So if you say, yeah, I found the signal, mortality rates increased by this much, well, someone may say, well, what portion of that was just the cyber component versus the electrical infrastructure or the road
Well, again,
infrastructure?
it wasn't the cyber issue at all. I was just thinking there.
It's the main benefit of something like the NHS attack is
The variables were
yeah, it was a fixed amount of time. It was an organization that's been around for ages and kept really solid mortality numbers. You guys won't imagine some of the headaches I had to go through. They had really excellent numbers back in 2004. And sorry, like 2014. And then they changed how they did things a little bit after that. So if this happened a little bit earlier, it would have been quite a bit easier. But I'm sure the numbers are out there. They're just kind of not releasing it to random internet strangers, I guess.
Didn't Microsoft have a patch or WannaCry for like 2 years before they released it, and it's more subject to older platforms?
You know,
Keep up
actually,
with the current, basically, but
That's why they call it WannaCry, because it wants to make you cry.
no, an important aspect is what is it? Some of the key tools that were used in WannaCry were cyber warfare. Weapons, right? Quote unquote, that were leaked, right? So there's different ways of looking at this problem. What's the liability of the manufacturers or the countries that put these out there?
You're talking the United States, aren't you, right? Yeah. Or NSA specifically, why did it leak? How did it get leaked, and how come you're not responsible for this mess that's happening around the world?
I mean, from a slightly personal perspective, I have family in the UK, right? And some of them actually had appointments canceled as a result of this. My mother-in-law was one of them. So, I mean, people complain and say bad things, nasty things about mother-in-laws, but mine is a saint, I promise. This could really be an issue if someone says, I lost a family member because of this. The United States has large bags of money that they could go after potentially. Who knows? Do me rhetorically. I'm slowly walking by Jamal over here.
Stand by Jamal, he's safe. Listen, I want to tie something together with this, if you don't mind, and we can have a lot of conversation. I really hope this sparks conversation. We've been talking about law, people's behavior, cyber, and you bring up something really interesting about the potential to possibly use data to realize mortality rates specifically related to a cyber event. Now right now we were talking about the only way, and cyber war versus cyber warfare, Tassilo spent a little bit of time talking about that. The only way you can really kill somebody through cyber is known as an attack, is really, through a computer essentially first degree killing somebody. It's kind of complicated, I don't even know how it's going to happen, but it falls under the law of conflict. What if you could somehow do this? And if your research proves, you're right now research in progress, what if your research in progress can eventually prove that there are an increase in mortality rates tied to a particular cyber event? Then maybe, just maybe, we could change the law, and application of the law may be better, to say that there is damage from a cyber event and that impacts human life. And so what he's working on is so powerful. When we were discussing this in the office, just, may I say, shooting the shit one day, I was like, damn, you gotta write about this, man, this is amazing. Because it could change the way we look at this law. And that is powerful.